Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 4th of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather service information. You can do that anytime from just about anywhere in Alaska by calling 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. And if you save the numbers that you're asked to enter there to define your location and what you want for your forecast, you can do that a lot faster the next time around if you haven't used that before. You can always find our information 24 hours a day on weather.gov/Alaska, including the images from the show that you're watching now. A little bit later on in the evening hours, you'll be able to see those. And of course, as you get closer to the next day, those will expire. And you can check in with the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, or the forecast office of your choice to get the latest information and keep you up to date throughout your planning period. Anytime that you want, you have a question about what you're finding here or can't find the service that you need, please let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way to find me any time of the day. Here's a look at the winter weather watches and advisories we have out for the region right now. Warnings and advisories, I should say. The areas in red, all the way from the Brooks Range there, are winter storm warnings now. In those regions, we're expecting about 2 to 4 inches across the western Brooks Range there, with some areas seeing as much as 9 inches. That'll start tonight and go through tomorrow. In the south and eastern Brooks Range, we're expecting 4 to 7 inches in general, with as much as 10 inches in some localized areas. Now in the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and the lower Koyukuk and the middle Yukon valleys, expecting on the order of about 3 to 5 inches of snow in general. Those advisories will start later on this afternoon and this evening and go into Sunday. And the same is said for parts of the central interior, the middle Tanana Valley, including Fairbanks, and the upper Yukon Valley and the Yukon Flats region, including Fort Yukon and down into the Denali region, generally west of the Parks Highway. This region, in general, again, we'll be talking about 2 to as much as 5 inches of snow. Now, there could be some areas that see just a little bit more than that. This will be a storm that's passing through during the evening hours tonight and lasting into midday hours on Sunday, ending from west to east as we go. So places that will still be looking at snow late in the day would probably be out toward the Yukon Flats and the Tanana Valley, and probably out into the eastern edges of the Fairbanks region as we get into the afternoon. There will be accumulating snow in this region, and for many even in toward Eagle and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, don't be surprised to pick up 2 to 4 inches of snow, even though you're not under a winter weather advisory or a storm warning at this point. So snow is coming, and that is going to include South Central as well. Could be an inch or two by the time you wake up in the morning across parts of the Anchorage region, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. In areas on the hillside, stand to see maybe just a little bit more if the winds are pointed in just the right direction when this weather system comes through. Let's take a look at where we stand right now. Dry air is sitting right across southeastern Alaska. It's been a breezy day, but not a terribly windy one, but just wait for it. There looks like there will be an opportunity for the wind to crank up here in not too long. As we look across south central and southwest, you can see plenty of clouds moving back into the region and a lot of higher cloud top and moisture content here in the atmosphere for the central and northern parts of Alaska. Low pressure is strengthening out across the Bering Strait region and to the north and west, with high pressure in the east and high pressure in the west. As the system is moving through fairly quickly, it's got a very sharp defined edge here, and that is the contrast in the atmosphere that is going to help squeeze out and create more snow for the interior and points in the east. As this is working through the interior, it does have plenty of cold air to tap into, and it also has a decent moisture feed coming in from the south. And as we'll talk about here in the aviation section here in just a little bit, you'll be able to see that sharp contrast of warm air coming up across the west and really driving up those freezing levels here. So as we go into the forecast for today and tonight, notice low pressure here sitting across the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula. Not a whole lot of snow or rain really falling across the west coast just yet. But as this system moves eastward, it's really going to start to tap into the moisture across the interior to create that possibility for about 2 to 5 inches of snow in general, and certainly more again up around the Brooks Range. High pressure sitting fairly close to Whitehorse and just north of 1,036 millibars. With the gradient across southeast, it's created some gusty conditions across southeastern Alaska, but not a huge wind event by any stretch of the imagination. Out across the Bering, a 1,031 millibar high there is working with areas of fog and stratus across the central and eastern chain, as well as points around the Pribilofs. Got a little bit of light rain across the southern part of the Alaska Peninsula out toward the eastern end of the chain. And for many across south central, we've just seen the clouds start to roll back into the region. Now, as we go ahead into tonight, watch for pockets of light snow to develop and increase from west to east, and this will start to pick up in earnest as we head through the early morning hours of tomorrow as this wave of low pressure moves across the state. Across south central, expect rain across the coastal areas and Kodiak Island with low pressure down across the open waters of the Gulf. At 1,014 millibars, it's not a whole lot to look at just yet, but once again, as you check in with the aviation section in just a little while, you'll notice that the upper atmosphere tomorrow is splitting just offshore of southeast, and that's going to allow this low pressure system to ramp up and strengthen fairly quickly just offshore, creating the potential for storm force winds and seas just offshore of southeast and perhaps creeping into some of the entrances as well. So as we go into Sunday and Monday, you'll want to keep an eye on the forecast here for parts of southeast. Out across the west, rainfall across the western end of the chain. Low pressures at 994 millibars there. And again, a lot of this activity will be spreading warmer air northward across the western Bering. Here we go into Sunday now, and low pressure is deepening as we were talking about, with high pressure scooting out of the way. A strengthening southerly flow will push its way into the northern Gulf and northern parts of southeast. You'll see clouds more than anything else around the Chilkoot and White passes there. Out across parts of the central interior, snow should be winding down slowly and surely during the day from west to east again. The heaviest snow once again will be around the Brooks Range, and some of those totals could push the 9 to 10 inch range in isolated locations, but by and large, you're probably talking about 2 to maybe as much as 7 across the higher terrain there. For the interior, we're talking about snowfall totals in general about 2 to 5 inches of snow, with advisories and warnings posted for the region. Snow showers may be found as far west of the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound and down into the lower and middle Yukon and even the upper Kuskokwim valleys and some areas along the Kuskokwim coast and the Wood-Tikchik Mountains. Probably wouldn't be surprised to see snow showers there. Rain showers continue out west, but mainly it's high pressure in charge of the Bering at this point. As we get into Monday, here's our low pressure system across the Gulf, down to 978 millibars now, with an occluded front working in toward the coastline. It's really going to focus a lot of this wind into the Clarence Strait, into the Sumner Strait and the Chatham Strait, so watch for those winds to come up. Monday is not going to be a really nice day, especially for central and southern parts of southeast, and there may be an opportunity for some rain and snow in the region, especially the southern half. A better chance of snow for the Juneau region and points northward, though right now accumulations seem to be on the light side. It's worth watching. 978 millibar low here in the central Gulf. That's working with high pressure across the interior at 1,033 millibars. That's going to be some cold weather working through the interior and drier conditions for Bristol Bay. But now that that's moved along, colder air can sweep across the Bering now at 967 millibars. Another surge of clouds, rain, and mixed with snow will make its way toward the west coast as we get into your Monday night and Tuesday. So let's look at the weather pattern. Here's a look at temperatures as we go through Sunday morning. 20s and 30s for southeast. The central and eastern interior still dealing with some dry and cold air. Single digits and low teens there for places like Fort Yukon, Eagle, Northway, even Gulkana, and 4 up around Arctic Village. Teens and 20s for the North Slope. Lower 30s for many across the west coast. 29 in Nome, Kodiak 36, and mid to upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula as well as the central and eastern chain. High temperatures tomorrow back in the teens and 20s in parts of southeast in the 30s and 40s. South central, you're looking at mid to upper 30s at best. 44 around Kodiak with southwest in the mid 30s. Nome 35, Kotzebue around 31 degrees, and the North Slope back in the lower to mid 20s. Overnight lows as we get into Monday morning, single digit territory for the central and eastern interior, upper 20s and low 30s for southeast. South central about the same, 38 in Kodiak, closer to 40 for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain, with the west coast back in the mid 20s, including Bethel at 25 and Nome around 26, with St. Lawrence Island in the upper 30s, warming to nearly 40 degrees by Monday though. The central and eastern interior in the teens and 20s. Arctic Village down to 9. That's a high temperature on Monday. Teens and 20s for the North Slope, 30s and maybe a few 40s for southeast. South central just a hair above freezing, with Kodiak Island closer to 45 degrees on Monday afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. IFR will take over most of the interior and a large part of the west coast and south central as a wave of snow is working over the region. It's a pretty sharp trough in the upper atmosphere, and you can pick it out fairly clearly on satellite pictures that we saw just a little while ago. As this is transitioning eastward, we'll probably start off with pretty low decks and poor visibility to start, but as you'll see very quickly in the afternoon, a lot of this is spreading eastward. In fact, just beginning to creep into Chilkoot and White Pass. We'll call that marginal or MVFR as we get into the afternoon, but most of southeast should remain in the clear as we go through the remainder of your weekend. Up north, IFR is expected north of the higher terrain of the Brooks Range, so once you get north of the summits, conditions should worsen and decks should lower fairly quickly. Out west, you can see patchy MVFR, IFR around St. Lawrence Island and the western chain. By the time we get into Monday, MVFR is still really slow to creep into parts of southeast. It will linger around some of those northern passes in the northern Gulf. Portage Pass and Prince William Sound looks to be okay, but areas out around Mentasta Pass and north of the Alaska Range will probably suffer the most, as well as regions north of Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass all the way out toward Barrow, Prudhoe Bay, and Kaktovik. Out west, patchy areas of IFR across another sharp trough that's traveling eastward fairly quickly. IFR develops across southern parts of southeast as we get into Monday afternoon, sparing northern sections around the Lynn Canal, MVFR, along the outer coast and elsewhere to the west, and then lingering across some of the eastern Alaska Range out toward Mentasta with MVFR considerable out across most of the eastern half of the coastal plain. IFR just outside of Kotzebue Sound toward Point Hope and Point Lay. Here's a look at the pass conditions in detail for your Sunday. Anaktuvuk and Adigan passes we saw look to be low deck and poor visibility thanks to snow moving through the region on your Sunday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may see some improvements by the afternoon, but a start around IFR is expected at this point. For Rainy Pass, expect instrument flight rule through most of the daytime, and that should be said for Windy Pass as well. IFR conditions there really through all of Sunday. And Isabel Pass, we expect to see IFR through most of the day. Mentasta Pass will probably transition during the day as snow is moving in from west to east. And as we look at Tenedo Pass, expect IFR conditions there through most of your Sunday. Some improvements again on Monday. And Porter's Pass, IFR conditions to start there with some improvement by the afternoon, especially in the western side. And Chilkoot and White Pass may sneak into MVFR as the day goes on, but a lot of the worst weather will stay off to the west, at least for Sunday. Here's a look at freezing levels now, and with this really strong southerly flow on the western side of high pressure, we're seeing those warmer levels return to the central and western Bering and certainly the western Aleutians. Out east, though, it's a different story. Colder air is moving southward, and with that we have 2, 4, and 6,000 foot levels that are even offshore and over southeast, with the surface freezing line cutting right through southeastern Alaska, Kodiak Island, and most of the Kenai Peninsula. Icing potential then is a little bit higher out across the west as far as the levels go anyway, above 10,000 feet. We'll continue with isolated moderate out west, but many areas looking at some considerable moderate across the central interior and across the north slope. Those levels as low as 2 to about 6,000 feet and even higher out across the northern Gulf above 7,000 feet, though the risk of icing is a little bit lower. The jet stream shows several bumps in the pattern that is driving our surface weather right now. You can see one across the Pacific Northwest, another across the interior and the Gulf, and yet another building trough out here across eastern Asia. All of this is moving from west to east, of course, and we have northwesterlies moving ashore at 60 knots across the north slope. Those northwesterly winds across the west coast are running around 100 knots. But the other factor in this is the southern component of the jet stream just to the south, and that is the southerlies pushing moisture into Alaska. Combining with the cold, that's a pretty good recipe for snow across the region. At 9,000 feet, you can see low pressure across the Gulf, steering in winds that are actually splitting or diverging just offshore of southeastern Alaska. This would be a good pattern to watch for low pressure to move into this region here. Northerlies working across the north slope, 20 to 25 knots, and you can see high pressure isn't slowing down the winds in its entirety across the Bering. In fact, a much stronger southerly flow is working up the west side of that with 50 to 80 knots there, and north and westerlies coming in to Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound at 40 to 50 knots. At 3,000 feet, a similar pattern shows wind speeds coming in from the north across the central interior, about 20 to 30 knots. West and southwesterlies moving into southeastern Alaska, and across the chain anywhere from 25 to 45 knots there, with wind speeds near the Gulf Coast running around 10 to 30 knots. Turbulence then should focus on southwestern Alaska, parts of the Seward Peninsula, and northern sections of the Yukon Delta and Prince William Sound, generally below about 4 to 6,000 feet. There's also going to be some chop across the central and western chain around 3 to 4,000 feet. Most areas in southeast and the north slope should be A-OK at this time. That's a look at your aviation forecast. Back with marine weather here in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the day-night band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western, or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easier to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery. Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in. It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora. And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
This looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. We can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's
are...
that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here,
Yeah.
so you don't get the green or the purple colors
How
there.
about that?
But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick look of your sea ice edge, and as you can see, there's still a lot of changes up across the Beaufort Seacoast, and with warm air and wind blowing across the region, there will continue to be changes in that region until this solidifies and the overall weather pattern isn't quite so warm. In the meantime, I haven't had much of a good look out of here across the Yukon Delta region from Macquarie all the way up to Amonic and the eastern Norton Sound. A lot of cloud cover here has prohibited that so far, so not such a great level of confidence here, but we're getting a couple looks here across the Beaufort Seacoast and some additional higher concentration ice, but we do expect changes again with the warmer weather pattern in place. Let's take a look at southeast now. Winds will be fairly gentle, let's say, for southeast. A gentle south and easterly wind coming up through the inside passages, 10 knots with 2-foot seas on the inside, and southerly flow up the outer coast up to 15 knots outside of Cross Sound, and a little bit of a stronger flow across the northern Gulf with easterlies gusting up to 45 as you approach Cordova and outside of Prince William Sound. Take a look at Monday, though, as that low pressure system deepens rapidly across the eastern and central Gulf. We're going to get a strong south and easterly offshore flow anywhere sustained from 50 to 60 knots and gusts upwards of 70 coming out of the entrances here. So plan on a much different day on Monday. On the inside passages, look for a northerly flow gusting up to 50 out of the Northumberland Canal, 25 knots with 5-foot seas in Stevens Passage, and a stiff southeasterly flow inside of Clarence Strait with gusts to 60 knots there and 12-foot seas. So storm force winds and seas expected on Monday in southeast. For south central, breezy and a stiff southeasterly wind at times, but look for easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 3-foot seas there. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, northwesterlies west of the Barrens, 35 knots with the 12-foot seas, 7-foot seas on the eastern Barrens. 7-foot seas there will diminish a little bit more as you head north into the Gulf with 5-foot seas outside of Prince William Sound. But as that low pressure system develops and strengthens across the east, we'll also see winds picking up here across south central. For Monday, the northerlies in many locations, 20 to 30 knots sustained and 11 to 12-foot seas there. Inside of Cook Inlet, winds pick up 25 knots with 5 to as strong as 9-foot seas there by the end of the day. Across Prince William Sound to the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay we go for Sunday. Northwesterlies there inside the bay, 25 knots with 7-foot seas, 12-foot seas in Chillicothe Strait with that northwesterly wind picking up even more as you head east of Kodiak, 40 knots. Northerlies all the way across the Bering Sea coast and the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula, 7 to 8-foot seas there on a 25-knot wind. And then by Monday, you can still see the effects of the low pressure system here with the higher seas east of Kodiak, but 10 to 14-foot seas should be expected on Monday, 6-foot seas inside of Chillicothe Strait, and 5-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast and inside of Bristol Bay. You're looking at a northerly wind about 25 knots and 20 to 30-knot winds there across the Pacific coastline. For the Aleutians then on Sunday, look for north and easterly winds wrapping into high pressure up here and the low pressure system that's drawing it in out across the west. Southeasterlies across the western chain, 35 to 40, 11 to 16-foot seas there, 6 to 9-foot seas across the central and eastern regions. By Monday, the return flow is starting to pick up across the western chain, southwesterlies, 14-foot seas, otherwise southerlies continue for many in the central and eastern chain, 20 to 30 knots with 5 to 9-foot seas across the central and eastern Bering Sea coast and 6 to 9 foot seas across the Pacific coast there for Monday. Across the west coast, northerlies inside of Norton Sound and sea ice free waters, 5 foot seas there. Slightly variable flow as high pressures moving through the region. Northerlies south of Nunivak Island, a north and easterly wind for the Pribilofs at 15 knots, and southeasterlies for St. Matthew with a 9 foot sea on Sunday. That's going to pick up to 40 knots with a 21 foot sea on Monday, with southeasterlies picking up across the Yukon Delta coastline as well. North of Nunivak Island, 30 to 40 knots, 20 to 30 knots south of the island, and southeasterlies into the Pribilofs at 30 knots with a 9 foot sea on Monday. Across the North Slope and for the sea ice free waters, look for 15-knot winds for most of the Beaufort Seacoast, 3 foot seas there, and a west to northwesterly flow from Point Lay all the way into Kotzebue Sound, looking for 5 foot seas on Sunday, and a stiffening southerly wind with warmer air moving northward ahead of the next wave, anywhere from 7 to 8 foot seas there, but 17 foot seas around St. Lawrence Island on a southeasterly 40-knot wind. Generally light conditions there across the Beaufort Seacoast. Recapping tonight's weather, a fast-moving wave of snow will move through the interior, the Brooks Range, with winter storm warnings posted, and upwards of 5 to 7, even 8 inches of snow. Isolated areas of 9 to 10 inches of snow there in the Brooks Range. South of that, in general, most areas in the interior have the risk of 3 to 5 inches of snow, about 2 to 4 east of the Fairbanks region, but you may see some light accumulations there in town. And for South Central, a couple inches of snow may be found by early tomorrow morning, and wrapping up as we go through the afternoon on your Sunday with a deepening storm across the eastern Gulf for southeast on Monday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hi, I'm Ed Ullman, CEO and General Manager of Alaska Public Media. If you're currently a member, whether you give every month or every year, thank you so much for your continued support. To our new members that recently joined, welcome. And